The lawyer looked up from the final page of my father's will, removed his glasses, and quietly cleared his throat. For a moment, no one moved. The room was so silent that I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking behind me. My mother sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to hide the confidence on her face. My older brother leaned back in his chair, already smiling as if he had won something before the reading had even begun. Then the lawyer spoke the words that changed every one of our lives. According to the last will and testament of Mr. Richard Harrison, all personal assets, real estate holdings, business interests, investments, and savings shall be transferred to Ms. Elena Brooks. The lawyer paused. His housekeeper. I blinked. My brother laughed. My mother frowned. I'm sorry, she said. You must have read the wrong page. The lawyer slowly shook his head. I assure you, Mrs. Harrison, I did not. The color drained from everyone's face. The woman who had cleaned our home for nearly 15 years, the quiet maid who always stayed in the background, had just inherited everything. $23 million. The family mansion. The vacation homes. The company my grandfather built. Everything. The room erupted into chaos. My brother slammed both hands onto the table. This is fraud. My mother stood so quickly that her chair crashed onto the floor. She manipulated him, she shouted, pointing directly at Elena. I knew it. I knew she was after his money. But Elena didn't argue. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. Instead, she lowered her eyes, clutching a small envelope against her chest as tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. It wasn't the reaction of someone who had just become rich. It was the reaction of someone carrying a burden. At that moment, none of us understood why. And if we had, everything would have been different. My name is Claire Harrison, and for most of my life, I believed my father was the strongest man I had ever known. He wasn't perfect. He worked long hours. He missed birthdays. He canceled vacations because another business deal couldn't wait. But whenever he came home, he somehow made us feel like we mattered. At least, that's what I believed growing up. Our family lived in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods outside Boston. My father had turned a successful construction company into a nationwide business worth millions. My mother loved reminding people that we came from old money, though the truth was that my father had earned almost everything himself. People admired us. Neighbors envied us. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Inside those walls, things weren't nearly as perfect. Looking back now, I realize the cracks had been there for years. We simply chose not to see them. When Elena first came to work for us, I was 13 years old. She was quiet, polite, always early, always the last person to leave. She never interrupted conversations, never offered opinions unless someone asked. My mother rarely thanked her. My brother treated her as if she were invisible. Sometimes he would leave dirty dishes around the house simply because he knew someone else would clean them. Elena never complained. She would simply smile softly and continue working. My father, however, was different. Every morning before leaving for work, he would ask her how her son was doing at school. He remembered her birthday. He insisted she sit down and eat lunch instead of working through the afternoon. Back then, I thought he was simply being kind. Now I know there was much more to those conversations than anyone realized. There were moments, small moments, that seemed meaningless at the time. A quiet conversation in the garden. An envelope exchanged in the kitchen. My father's serious expression whenever Elena handed him a folder. Whenever someone entered the room, they immediately stopped talking. I noticed it. But I was too young to question it. Years passed. Our lives changed. My brother joined the family business. I moved to another city after college. My parents' marriage grew colder with each passing year. Yet somehow, Elena remained. Always in the background. Always loyal. Always present. Until the day everything fell apart. It started with a phone call I almost ignored. A call that would bring me back home. And uncover a secret my father had spent years protecting. The phone rang just after 6 on a rainy Tuesday morning. I almost let it go to voicemail. After years of living 3 states away, calls from home usually meant one of two things. My mother wanted to complain about my brother, or my brother wanted to complain about my mother. Either way, I wasn't in the mood. But something made me answer. Claire? The voice on the other end trembled. It was Elena. She had never called me before. Not once in 15 years. Your father. She whispered, struggling to breathe. He's in the hospital. My heart dropped. What happened? There was a long silence before she answered. He collapsed in his office. I grabbed my keys without saying another word. The 4-hour drive back to Boston felt endless. Rain pounded against my windshield as 1,000 memories flooded my mind. I kept telling myself he'd be fine. My father had always been the strongest person I knew. He worked 16-hour days, rarely took a vacation, and somehow still found the energy to solve everyone else's problems. Men like him weren't supposed to collapse. When I reached the hospital, my mother and brother were already there. Neither of them looked surprised to see me. My mother hugged me briefly before pulling away. The doctors are still running tests, she said, her voice strangely calm. Can I see him? They're not allowing visitors yet. I looked around the waiting room. That's when I noticed Elena sitting alone in the corner. She wasn't with us. She wasn't reading a magazine or scrolling through her phone. She simply stared at the floor, holding a worn leather notebook against her chest as if it were the most valuable thing she owned. Her eyes were red. She looked exhausted. Before I could walk over, my brother stepped in front of me. Don't, he muttered. What do you mean? She's already upset enough. His tone caught me off guard. Since when did my brother care about Elena's feelings? Before I could ask another question, a doctor entered the waiting room. His expression told us everything before he even spoke. I'm sorry, he began. Your father suffered a severe cardiac event. The room froze. He survived, the doctor quickly added, but his heart is very weak. Relief washed over me. For a brief moment, I thought everything would return to normal. I couldn't have been more wrong. Over the next few weeks, my father changed. Not physically. Emotionally. The man who had always laughed the loudest during family dinners barely spoke. He spent hours sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset without saying a word. He started leaving the office early. Sometimes he didn't go at all. One afternoon, I found him standing in the old workshop behind the house, staring at boxes filled with family photographs. "You remember this one?" he asked, handing me a faded picture. I smiled. It was from my 10th birthday. We were all together. Mom was laughing. My brother had frosting all over his face. Dad had one arm around me. Even Elena was in the background, carrying a birthday cake into the room. "I thought we were happy," I said. Dad smiled sadly. So did I. There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Regret. Real regret. Before I could ask what he meant, he carefully placed the photograph back into the box. "Claire," he said quietly, "if people only tell you half the truth, you end up believing a complete lie." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He looked at me for a long moment before shaking his head. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I knew it. He changed the subject so quickly that I almost believed I had imagined the conversation. A few days later, something even stranger happened. I woke up early to get a glass of water. As I walked past my father's study, I noticed the door wasn't fully closed. Voices drifted into the hallway. One belonged to my father. The other was Elena's. "I don't know how much time I have left," my father said quietly. "You promised me," Elena replied. "I know. No matter what happens, they can't find out until you're gone." "I understand." There was another long silence. Then I heard something that sent chills through my entire body. "If they discover the truth now," Elena whispered, "it will destroy this family." I stepped back before they could see me. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. Destroy this family? What truth? I wanted to open the door. I wanted answers. Instead, I walked away. It was a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. Because less than 3 weeks later, my father was dead. And the secret he had spent years protecting was about to tear our family apart in ways none of us could have imagined. My father was buried on a cold Friday morning beneath a gray sky that seemed determined to mourn with us. The church was overflowing. Business partners flew in from across the country. Former employees stood shoulder to shoulder with executives who had spent decades building the company beside him. Neighbors, friends, and even people I had never met came to pay their respects. One by one, they described him as generous, honest, loyal, a man who never forgot where he came from. As I listened, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation I had overheard outside his study. "If they discover the truth now, it will destroy this family." Those words echoed in my mind through every prayer and every hymn. I searched the crowd until my eyes found Elena. She stood alone in the very last row of the church. She wore a simple black dress that looked years old. Her hands were folded tightly in front of her, and she never once tried to move closer to the family. When people approached to offer condolences, they hugged my mother. They shook my brother's hand. Almost no one spoke to Elena. Yet every few minutes, I caught someone staring at her. Whispering. Pointing. Rumors travel fast when money is involved. By the end of the funeral, I had already overheard the same sentence at least 5 times. She was too close to Richard. At first, I ignored it. But once a seed of doubt is planted, it has a way of growing. The days after the funeral were strangely quiet. Friends stopped bringing food. The flowers began to wilt. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. My mother buried herself in meetings with accountants and attorneys. She kept saying the same thing over and over. We need to make sure everything is transferred correctly. She spoke as though the inheritance already belonged to us. My brother was even more confident. He walked through my father's office measuring walls and talking about renovations. This room needs a modern look, he said one afternoon. I'll probably turn it into my office. I looked at him in disbelief. Dad hasn't even been gone a week. He shrugged. Life moves on. His words stung more than I expected. Meanwhile, Elena continued working around the house exactly as she always had. She watered the plants, prepared meals, folded laundry. It was almost unsettling. How could someone carry on as if nothing had happened? Then again, maybe routine was the only thing holding her together. One evening, I found her sitting alone on the back porch after everyone had gone to bed. She was holding the same worn leather notebook I had seen at the hospital. She didn't notice me until I stepped closer. Couldn't sleep? I asked. She quickly closed the notebook. No. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me for days. What were you talking about with my father the night I overheard you? Her eyes widened. You heard us? I nodded. She looked down at the notebook resting in her lap. I can't answer that. Why not? Because I gave him my word. I felt frustration building inside me. My father is gone. I know. Then what are you protecting? Tears filled her eyes. Him. That answer only confused me more. Before I could ask another question, the back door opened. My mother stepped outside. The moment she saw us together, her expression hardened. There you are, she said sharply, looking only at me. The lawyer called. My stomach tightened. The will? She nodded. They're reading it tomorrow morning. For the first time since my father's funeral, I saw genuine fear flash across Elena's face. She stood so quickly that the notebook slipped from her lap onto the wooden porch. As she bent to pick it up, a folded piece of paper slid out onto the floor between us. I reached for it instinctively. She grabbed it first. Our eyes met. For a split second, I saw something inside the envelope. It wasn't money. It wasn't legal paperwork. It was a photograph. An old photograph. One that included my father. And a little girl I had never seen before. Before I could ask who she was, Elena tucked the picture back inside the notebook. I'm sorry, she whispered. I can't. She hurried inside the house, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. Who was that little girl? Why had my father kept her photograph? And why was Elena willing to protect a secret that seemed to be destroying her from the inside? The next morning, we walked into the attorney's office believing we were about to divide my father's estate. None of us realized. We were about to discover that my father had left every dollar, every property, every share of his company to the one person no one expected. And the room would never be the same again. The conference room felt colder than the weather outside. No one spoke as we took our seats around the polished oak table. The walls were lined with shelves filled with leather-bound law books, and the only sound came from the quiet hum of the air conditioner. My mother sat closest to the attorney, dressed in black as if the funeral had never really ended. My brother leaned back with his arms crossed, tapping his fingers impatiently against the table. I chose the chair beside the window. Across from us sat Elena. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her hands rested in her lap, tightly wrapped around that same worn leather notebook. She hadn't looked at any of us since entering the room. Mr. Collins, my father's attorney for nearly 30 years, adjusted his glasses and opened a thick folder. "I understand this is a difficult day," he began. "But your father was very clear that his wishes were to be carried out exactly as written." My mother nodded impatiently. "Please continue." The attorney started with the smaller gifts. A donation to the children's hospital where my father had volunteered years ago. Scholarship funds for students studying engineering. Bonuses for several long-time employees who had stayed with the company through difficult times. I smiled faintly. That sounded like my father. Always remembering people others overlooked. Then came the estate. Mr. Collins paused before reading the final pages. "I now come to the remainder of Mr. Harrison's assets." Every eye in the room fixed on him. The family residence. My brother straightened in his chair. All investment accounts. My mother reached for a pen, already making notes. All business interests, company shares, retirement accounts, savings, personal collections, vehicles, and remaining assets. He stopped. The silence became unbearable. "Are hereby transferred in their entirety?" Another pause. "To Ms. Elena Brooks." Time froze. No one moved. No one breathed. My mother was the first to react. She laughed. Not because she found it funny. Because she refused to believe it. "There must be another page." "There isn't," Mr. Collins replied calmly. My brother slammed both fists onto the table so hard that a glass of water tipped over. "This is impossible." "It is legally valid," the attorney answered. "No." My brother pointed across the room at Elena. "She manipulated him." Elena slowly shook her head. "I didn't." "Liar." He took a step toward her before I grabbed his arm. "Stop." He pulled away from me. "You actually believe this?" I don't know what to believe. For the first time, I realized that was the truth. I didn't. Nothing made sense anymore. My mother stood, her voice trembling with anger. "My husband built everything for this family." She turned toward Elena. "What did you do to him?" "I did nothing." "Then explain this." "I can't." Those two words only made everything worse. "You can't?" my mother shouted. "Or you won't." Elena lowered her eyes. I promised him. My mother's face turned red with fury. So there was something between you? No. You expect us to believe that? I can't tell you what he asked me to keep. The room exploded again. Accusations flew from every direction. Gold digger. Manipulator. Homewrecker. Liar. Through it all, Elena never raised her voice. She simply cried. Not the tears of someone caught in a lie. The tears of someone trapped by the truth. Mr. Collins finally stood. Enough. Everyone fell silent. There is one more instruction. My mother's expression changed immediately. What instruction? The attorney removed a sealed envelope from the folder. The deceased instructed me to deliver this letter to Ms. Brooks exactly 30 days after today's reading. My brother stared at him. What's in it? I don't know. Open it. I cannot. It concerns this estate. It concerns my client's final wishes. My brother looked ready to lose control. This is ridiculous. Mr. Collins met his eyes without flinching. Your father anticipated this reaction. Those words hung heavily in the room. He also instructed me to remind everyone of something he wrote in the final paragraph of his will. The attorney looked down and read slowly. The day will come when my family believes I betrayed them. When that day comes, I ask only one thing. Before judging the woman sitting across from you, ask yourselves whether you truly knew the man I became during the last 10 years of my life. Silence. No one spoke. No one even looked at one another. 10 years? Why those words? What had happened 10 years ago? As we left the office, reporters were already waiting outside. News of the shocking inheritance had spread faster than any of us imagined. Cameras flashed the moment Elena stepped through the doors. Did you have an affair with Richard Harrison? Are you the secret reason his marriage failed? Did you pressure him into changing his will? She said nothing. She simply lowered her head and walked toward an old blue sedan that barely looked capable of making it home. Inside our luxury SUVs, my mother watched her leave with quiet hatred. I'll challenge every word of that will, she said. I don't care how long it takes. My brother nodded. We'll destroy her. I stared through the window as Elena drove away alone. She had just inherited millions of dollars. Yet she drove the same old car. She still wore the same inexpensive clothes. She hadn't celebrated once. Instead, she looked like someone preparing for a storm she had always known was coming. I couldn't explain it. But for the first time since my father's death, I began to wonder if we had been asking the wrong question. Maybe the real question wasn't why my father left everything to Elena. Maybe it was, what had happened 10 years ago that made him believe his own family could never know the truth? By the following Monday, the story was everywhere. Every local news station seemed to have a headline about the Harrison family. Millionaire leaves entire fortune to Maid. Children cut out of multi-million-dollar estate. Secret affair or final revenge? People who had never met my father suddenly believed they knew everything about him. Former neighbors gave interviews. Old classmates shared stories online. Even strangers filled the comment sections with opinions about a family they had never known. Some called Elena a manipulator. Others insisted my father must have been suffering from dementia. A few defended him, saying a successful businessman would never give away everything without a reason. The louder the world became, the quieter Elena grew. She disappeared from public view completely. She stopped answering her phone. She avoided reporters. No one seemed to know where she had gone. My mother took her silence as proof of guilt. "She's hiding," she said during breakfast one morning. "Because she knows we're coming after her." Within days, she hired one of the most expensive probate attorneys in the state. The lawsuit claimed my father had been manipulated during the final years of his life and that the will should be declared invalid. My brother threw himself into the case with almost frightening determination. He collected old emails, bank records, medical reports, anything that might convince a judge that our father hadn't been thinking clearly. I tried to help at first. I really did. But every document I read only left me with more questions. There were no unusual bank transfers. No expensive gifts. No hidden accounts in Elena's name. Nothing suggested she had been taking advantage of him. In fact, the records showed something completely unexpected. During the last 10 years, my father had quietly donated millions of dollars to charities, scholarships, veterans organizations, women's shelters, children's hospitals. Many of the donations had been made anonymously. I frowned as I looked through the statements. If he had wanted to hide money, why was he giving so much of it away? That wasn't the behavior of a man obsessed with one woman. It was the behavior of someone preparing for something. A few days later, I returned to the family house to collect some of my childhood belongings. The mansion felt strangely empty. Most of the staff had already been dismissed while the legal battle continued. Only one room remained exactly as my father had left it. His study. I stood quietly in the doorway. The familiar scent of leather books and coffee still lingered in the air. His reading glasses rested on the desk beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. For a moment, I could almost imagine him walking back into the room, smiling, asking me how work was going. Instead, there was only silence. I opened the top drawer of his desk, expecting to find business papers. Instead, I found dozens of neatly organized folders. Each one was labeled with a year, all the way to the year he died. Curious, I opened the oldest folder. Inside were handwritten notes, medical appointments, copies of letters, receipts, newspaper clippings. At first, nothing made sense. Then one document caught my attention. It was a receipt from a small storage facility across town. The rental had been renewed every single month. For almost 10 years. I had never heard my father mention a storage unit. Why would a man with a mansion and multiple warehouses need one? I slipped the receipt into my bag. Before leaving the study, my eyes landed on a framed family photograph sitting on the bookshelf. It had been taken years earlier during one of our summer vacations. Something about it felt different now. I looked closer. My father wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking toward someone standing just outside the frame. I turned the photograph over. Written neatly on the back, in my father's handwriting, were 6 words. "The truth survives, even when I don't." A chill ran through my body. Those weren't the words of a man planning retirement. Those were the words of someone expecting to leave behind a mystery. The next morning, I drove to the storage facility alone. It sat on the edge of town, tucked behind an old warehouse district where almost no one passed anymore. The manager was an elderly man with silver hair and kind eyes. When I showed him my father's name, his expression softened. I was wondering if someone would come. "You knew my father?" He nodded. "He came here every month." "For 10 years? Never missed a payment." I swallowed hard. "What's inside the unit?" "I'm afraid I don't know." He reached beneath the counter and placed a small brass key in my hand. "But your father left instructions." My heart began to race. "What instructions?" The manager smiled sadly. "He said that one day, his daughter would arrive looking for answers." I stared at him. "My daughter will come," he had told the manager years ago. "And when she does, tell her the truth has been waiting for her." With trembling hands, I walked toward Unit 214. The hallway seemed impossibly long. Each step echoed against the concrete floor. When I finally reached the gray metal door, I slipped the key into the lock. It clicked. I took a slow breath, pulled the door open, and froze. Because stacked neatly from floor to ceiling were dozens of sealed boxes. Each one carried the same handwritten label. "For Claire." For a long moment, I couldn't move. Dust floated through the narrow beam of light spilling in from the open storage door. The room smelled of old paper, cedar wood, and time itself. Every box was carefully stacked. Every label had been written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. "For Claire." Why me? Not my brother. Not my mother. Just me. My hands trembled as I reached for the smallest box. The cardboard was worn around the edges, as though it had been handled countless times before finally being sealed. I slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a single envelope. Across the front, my father had written just 4 words. "Read this first." I sat down on the cold concrete floor before opening it. The letter inside was only 1 page. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then I've run out of time. I wish I could tell you everything face to face, but some truths are easier to understand after the noise has settled. Right now, I know what everyone believes. They believe I abandoned my family. They believe Elena stole everything. Please don't decide whether I'm guilty until you've seen every piece of the story. Promise me you'll keep an open heart. Love, Dad." I read the letter 3 times. Not because it was long. Because it didn't sound like a man trying to defend himself. It sounded like a father begging his daughter not to hate him. I wiped away a tear and reached for the second box. This one contained dozens of photographs. Most were ordinary. Company events. Holiday dinners. Family vacations. But then I noticed something strange. In almost every photograph taken during the last 10 years, My father looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. His smile never quite reached his eyes. It was as if he had been carrying a weight none of us could see. Beneath the photographs was a thick journal. The first page was dated exactly 10 years before his death. That date stopped me cold. It matched the same period mentioned in his will. Ask yourselves whether you truly knew the man I became during the last 10 years of my life. I opened to the first entry. Today I learned that success can build a house, but it cannot guarantee a home. I frowned. The next few pages described business meetings and charity work. Then the tone changed. Claire still calls every Sunday. She asks how I'm doing even when she's busy. I pray she never loses that kindness. I smiled through my tears. Then I kept reading. Her brother no longer visits unless he needs something. My smile faded. Another page. My wife hasn't asked how I feel in months. I looked away from the journal for a moment. Was that true? I searched my memories. Family dinners. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Had Mom ever really asked Dad if he was happy? I honestly couldn't remember. The journal wasn't filled with anger. There were no insults. No bitterness. Just quiet observations from a lonely man. Halfway through the notebook, something slipped out and landed on the floor. It was a folded receipt. Not from a restaurant. Not from a store. From a hospital. The date was nearly 9 years old. The patient's name had been covered with black ink. Only one sentence remained visible. Recommended immediate treatment. Why would my father hide the patient's name? Before I could think about it further, my phone rang. It was my brother. Where are you? I'm going through Dad's things. His voice hardened. If you're at the house, don't touch anything. I'm not. There was a pause. Claire. What? We found something. My stomach tightened. What is it? The investigators located Elena. I sat upright. Where? At a small house outside the city. So? He laughed bitterly. You should see how she lives. What do you mean? If she inherited $23 million, someone forgot to tell her. His words caught me off guard. What? She hasn't spent a single dollar. I frowned. How do you know? Because we had someone watching the property. I closed my eyes. You hired a private investigator? We're trying to prove she's hiding money. And did he? Silence. No. What did he find? My brother sighed. She still drives the same old car. The same one. She still buys groceries with coupons. The same tiny house. The same second-hand clothes. He sounded almost disappointed. Nothing about that fit the picture everyone had painted. A greedy woman doesn't inherit a fortune and continue living exactly as she did before. Unless the money was never what she wanted. That thought stayed with me long after the call ended. Before leaving the storage unit, I opened one final box. Inside was a small wooden case. Locked. Resting on top was another handwritten note. Not yet. You'll know when it's time. I stared at those words for nearly a minute. My father had planned every step of this. Every letter. Every clue. Every discovery. He wasn't simply leaving behind an inheritance. He was leading me toward a truth that couldn't be understood all at once. As I closed the final box, I noticed something I had somehow missed before. Taped to the inside wall of the storage unit was a yellow envelope. It had no stamp. No address. Only 3 words written across the front. For Elena. And underneath, in smaller handwriting. Only if Claire believes. I didn't sleep that night. The yellow envelope sat on the passenger seat beside me the entire drive home. For Elena. Only if Claire believes. Those words refused to leave my mind. Believe what? My father hadn't asked me to believe Elena was innocent. He hadn't asked me to forgive anyone. He had simply asked me to keep an open heart. For the first time since his death, I realized those weren't the same thing. The next morning, I made a decision I knew my mother and brother would never understand. I was going to see Elena. Alone. The address my brother's investigator had uncovered led me to a quiet neighborhood nearly an hour outside the city. There were no gated entrances, no luxury homes, no expensive cars parked in the driveways. Just small houses with faded paint, neatly trimmed lawns, and children riding bicycles along the sidewalks. When I finally found Elena's home, I almost drove past it. It was even more modest than I had imagined. A tiny white house with a weathered porch and flower pots filled with bright yellow daisies. The old blue sedan was parked in the driveway. Nothing about the place suggested the home of a millionaire. I sat in my car for several minutes, trying to understand. If she owned everything now, why hadn't she moved? Why hadn't she bought a new car? Why hadn't anything changed? Taking a deep breath, I walked to the front door and knocked. A few seconds later, it opened. Elena looked surprised to see me. Claire. I need answers. She looked at me quietly before stepping aside. Come in. The house was warm and simple. The furniture was old but spotless. Family photographs covered one wall. Not of my father. Of a young boy growing into a young man. I remembered then that years ago my father had often asked Elena about her son. I'd never even learned his name. She noticed me looking. His name is Daniel, she said softly. He's an elementary school teacher now. There was unmistakable pride in her voice. I smiled politely before remembering why I had come. I found my father's storage unit. Her expression changed instantly. He wanted you to. There were letters. She nodded. I know. There was an envelope for you. For the first time, genuine fear crossed her face. You haven't opened it? It's sealed. She slowly sat down. He trusted you. I don't understand any of this. I know. I reached into my bag and placed my father's first letter on the table. He told me not to judge until I'd seen the whole story. Tears gathered in Elena's eyes. He always believed you'd listen. What story? She closed her eyes. I can't tell you. I felt frustration rising again. Elena. I gave him my word. My father is gone. My promise isn't. The room fell silent. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me from the beginning. Did you love him? She looked directly into my eyes. Yes. The answer hit me like a wave. Before I could speak, she continued. But not the way everyone believes. I said nothing. I loved him the way you love someone who saves your life. Those words stopped me. What does that mean? She stood and walked to a small bookshelf in the corner of the room. From the top shelf, she carefully lifted an old wooden box. The same kind of box my father had used to store important papers. She placed it gently on the coffee table but didn't open it. He left this with me years ago. What's inside? I promised I wouldn't open it unless. Her voice cracked. Unless you came here on your own. A chill ran down my spine. He knew I would? He hoped. She slowly opened the lid. Inside were dozens of sealed envelopes. Every one of them was addressed in my father's handwriting. Some carried my name. Others were addressed to my brother. One was for my mother. And one was simply marked. Read last. What is all this? I whispered. My father called it. Elena said softly, his book of truth. Before I could reach for the letters, she gently placed her hand over the box. Not yet. I stared at her in disbelief. Not yet? There are still things you need to see first. I almost laughed. How many secrets did my father leave behind? She looked toward the window, where the afternoon sun was beginning to fade. Enough to break your heart. Her words hung heavily between us. Just then, someone knocked loudly on the front door. 3 sharp knocks. Elena's face turned pale. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Neither had I. She slowly opened the door. Standing on the porch were my mother, my brother, and 2 attorneys. My brother's eyes immediately landed on the wooden box sitting open on the coffee table. What is that? He demanded. No one answered. Then one of the attorneys stepped forward and handed Elena a thick envelope. You've been officially served. My mother folded her arms, her voice cold and steady. You've hidden behind your lies long enough. My brother took one step into the house. We're taking everything back. Elena quietly lowered her head. Then, for the first time since all of this began, she spoke words that made every person in the room fall silent. You can take every dollar your father left me. She looked at each of us with tears in her eyes. But none of you are ready for what he left behind. No one spoke. The words seemed to linger in the air long after Elena finished. You can take every dollar your father left me, but none of you are ready for what he left behind. My brother was the first to break the silence. Oh, enough with the drama, he snapped. You've fooled people long enough. He reached for the wooden box. Before his hand could touch it, Elena gently closed the lid and held it against her chest. You can't open it yet. Watch me. One of the attorneys stepped between them. Daniel, he said firmly, this isn't the time. My brother glared at Elena with a look I had never seen before. It wasn't just anger. It was desperation. He needed her to be guilty. Because if she wasn't, then everything we'd believed about our father would begin to fall apart. My mother turned toward me. "Claire, we're leaving." I didn't move. "Did you hear me? I want to stay." Her expression hardened. "She's manipulating you, too." "No," I answered quietly. "I'm trying to understand." Without another word, my mother walked out of the house. My brother followed, slamming the front door so hard that the pictures on the wall shook. The attorneys exchanged uneasy glances before leaving behind them. Silence returned. Elena slowly placed the wooden box back on the table. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For what you're about to lose." "I've already lost my father." She looked into my eyes with heartbreaking sadness. "No, Claire. You haven't." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, she reached into a kitchen drawer and removed a small silver key. "I've carried this for 9 years." She placed it gently in my hand. It looked almost identical to the key that had opened the storage unit. "What does it unlock?" "A safety deposit box." "Where?" "Your father rented it at a small bank downtown." I stared at the key. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because he told me not to." She walked to the window and watched the wind move through the flowers outside. "He said there would come a day when everyone would want his money." She paused. "But only one person would want the truth." My throat tightened. "He believed that person would be you." The next morning, I drove straight to the bank. The manager had already been notified of my father's passing. After checking my identification, he led me into the secure vault. Rows of steel boxes lined the walls. He unlocked one, stepped back, and left me alone. Inside was a thick manila envelope, a leather-bound journal, and a small digital recorder. My heart began to race. The envelope was marked "Open first." I carefully unfolded the papers inside. The first page wasn't a legal document. It was a medical report. I recognized the hospital logo immediately. It matched the receipt I had found in my father's storage unit. This time, however, nothing had been blacked out. The patient's name was clear. Richard Harrison. Diagnosis: congestive heart failure. Date: 9 years before his death. I felt the room begin to spin. 9 years. For 9 years. My father had known he was seriously ill. He had carried that burden completely alone. Suddenly, so many things made sense. The long evenings on the porch. The charity donations. The journals. The storage unit. The letters. He hadn't been preparing for retirement. He had been preparing for goodbye. Tears blurred my vision as I opened the leather journal. The first entry after his diagnosis read, "Today I learned my life will likely end much sooner than I expected. The doctors believe treatment may buy me time. But time is no longer something I can waste." I turned the page. If my family knew now, they would spend the rest of my life mourning me instead of living with me. Another page. I will tell them when the time is right. But the pages that followed revealed something even more painful. Again and again, he wrote about trying to bring the family together, planning vacations that everyone canceled, family dinners interrupted by business calls, birthdays where people spent more time looking at their phones than speaking to one another. One sentence made me stop breathing. Sometimes I wonder whether my family loves me, or simply the life I've given them. I covered my mouth. Had he really felt that alone? Then I reached the final page. Unlike the others, it wasn't addressed to himself. It was addressed to me. Claire, if you're reading this, then I was right. You kept searching. You didn't stop at anger. Thank you. My tears fell onto the paper. Beneath those words was one final instruction. Go home. Open the yellow envelope. And let Elena finish the story. I never could. I closed the journal and looked at the digital recorder still resting inside the box. A small label had been attached to it. In my father's handwriting were 6 simple words. Play only when everyone is together. I stared at the recorder, realizing what it meant. Whatever was on that recording, it wasn't meant for me alone. It was meant for the entire family. And somehow, I knew that after we heard my father's own voice one last time, nothing about our family would ever be the same. By the time I returned to Elena's house, the sun was beginning to set. The sky glowed with deep shades of orange and gold, but I barely noticed. My hands were still trembling from everything I had discovered at the bank. 9 years. My father had lived with the knowledge that his heart was failing. 9 years of smiling through birthdays. 9 years of pretending everything was normal. 9 years of carrying a secret because he believed he was protecting us. When Elena opened the front door, she looked at my face and immediately knew. You found the journal. I nodded. And the diagnosis. Another nod. She quietly stepped aside. You understand now. No, I whispered. I understand that I knew far less about my father than I ever imagined. She didn't argue. Instead, she led me back to the living room where the wooden box still rested on the coffee table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached into my bag and placed the yellow envelope in front of her. It says it's for you. She stared at it without touching it. I've been afraid of this day. Why? Because once I open it. She paused, fighting back tears. There's no going back. Slowly, she broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. As she began reading, tears rolled silently down her face. I waited. When she finally finished, she carefully handed the letter to me. My father's handwriting filled every line. Elena. If Claire has placed this letter in your hands, then she chose compassion over anger. That means I was right about her. It's time. Tell her everything. I looked up. Elena was already crying. I met your father 16 years ago, she said softly. I know. No, you know I worked for him. She took a slow breath. You don't know why. She folded her hands together as if trying to steady herself. My husband died when Daniel was only 6 years old. I had nothing. I worked 3 jobs. I slept 4 hours a night. One winter, Daniel became seriously ill. Her voice cracked. I couldn't afford the treatment. I listened without interrupting. I went everywhere looking for help. Churches, charities, friends. No one could help. She closed her eyes. Then someone told me about a businessman who quietly helped families without asking for anything in return. I already knew who that businessman was. My father. She nodded. I expected to meet a wealthy executive who would write a check and send me away. Instead, he spent 2 hours listening to my story. He paid every hospital bill. He made sure Daniel received the treatment he needed. He even found me a stable job. She smiled through her tears. The housekeeping position. I felt my chest tighten. He told me it wasn't charity. He said every honest person deserves another chance. I thought about the man everyone had praised at his funeral. Perhaps none of us had ever truly known just how quietly generous he had been. But that's not why he left you everything, I said. She slowly shook her head. No. She reached into the wooden box and removed one final sealed envelope. Across the front, my father's handwriting read, "For my family." Before either of us could open it, there was another knock at the door. This time, it wasn't unexpected. Standing outside were my mother and my brother. They looked exhausted. Not angry. Just tired. Behind them stood Mr. Collins, carrying a small black case. "I believe," he said quietly, "it's finally time." I looked down at the digital recorder resting inside the case. For the first time since my father's death, every person he had wanted in one room was finally together. I reached for the recorder. My thumb hovered over the play button. The room became completely silent. No arguments. No accusations. Only the sound of our breathing. I pressed play. Static crackled for a moment. Then, my father's familiar voice filled the room. "Hello. If you're hearing this." Then my final plan worked. Every head turned toward the recorder. Even my brother, who had sworn he would never believe another word connected to Elena, couldn't look away. My father's voice was calm, gentle, and somehow, it felt as though he were sitting beside us one last time. He took a slow breath before speaking again. "I know all of you have questions. I also know many of you are angry. Before you judge anyone, please listen until the very end." The room remained perfectly still. Then came the sentence that made my heart stop. The greatest mistake I ever made was believing that providing for my family was the same thing as being present for them. I looked at my mother. She lowered her eyes. My father continued. "I spent decades building wealth because I thought money would protect the people I loved. Instead, it slowly became the only thing some of us could see." Tears filled my eyes. Not because he sounded angry. Because he sounded deeply saddened. Then he said something none of us expected. "I didn't leave my estate to Elena because she asked for it. I left it to her because she was the only person I trusted to carry out the promise we made together." The recording ended with a soft click. Silence filled the room. A promise? What promise? Every eye turned toward Elena. She slowly placed her hand on the final envelope. My father, she whispered, wanted you to know the rest. And with trembling hands, she began to open it. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. It was only a few sheets of paper, but somehow it carried the weight of years of silence, misunderstandings, and pain. Elena carefully unfolded the letter. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply stared at my father's handwriting as if seeing his words again brought him back for one final conversation. Then she began to read. To my family. If you are hearing this, then you have finally reached the moment I hoped would come. Not the moment where you receive my money. The moment where you discover the truth. My mother looked away. My brother stood completely still. For the first time since the will was read, no one was fighting. No one was accusing. We were finally listening. I spent most of my life believing success meant building something that would outlive me. A company. A reputation. A fortune. But as I grew older, I realized I had been measuring my life by what I owned instead of who I loved. I felt tears forming in my eyes. Because those words sounded exactly like the father I remembered. And the father I never truly understood. Claire, you were always the one who looked beyond the money. You asked how I was feeling when everyone else asked what I could provide. I lowered my head. My father noticed things I thought he never saw. Daniel. My brother looked up when he heard his name. My son, I know you believe I abandoned you. My brother's expression changed. But the truth is, I spent years trying to reach you. Every conversation became about business. Every visit became about success. Somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your father and started seeing me as the person who could give you more. My brother swallowed hard. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Regret. And to my wife. My mother closed her eyes. I loved you. But somewhere along our journey, we became partners in appearance instead of partners in life. A tear slipped down her face. We stopped asking each other what we needed. We stopped seeing each other. The room remained silent. Then my father's words turned to Elena. Elena came into my life during my darkest moment. Not as a replacement for my family. Not as someone seeking my wealth. But as someone who reminded me that kindness still existed. I looked at Elena. She was crying quietly. When I became sick, I asked Elena to help me create something important. A foundation. My eyebrows lifted. A foundation? The estate she inherited was never meant to become personal wealth. Everyone froze. My brother stepped forward. What? Elena looked at him with sadness. My father's voice continued. Everything transferred to Elena because I trusted her to complete my final mission. The money will be used to create the Harrison Hope Foundation. A foundation dedicated to helping families who cannot afford medical care, education, and emergency support. The room went completely silent. My brother stared at Elena. My mother covered her mouth. All the anger. All the accusations. All the hatred. It suddenly had nowhere to go. Because the person everyone believed had stolen our inheritance had never wanted it. She had been protecting it. My father's final words played. My children were born into comfort, but comfort can sometimes make people forget compassion. I don't want my final gift to be money. I want it to be a lesson. The person who deserves your trust is not always the person standing closest to your name. Sometimes it is the person standing closest to your heart. The recording ended. No dramatic music. No final speech. Just silence. The kind of silence that forces people to face themselves. My brother slowly sat down. I was wrong, he whispered. No one answered. He looked at Elena. I thought you took something from us. His voice broke. But you were protecting something my father cared about. Elena nodded. He loved you. My brother wiped his face quickly, almost embarrassed by his own emotions. I don't deserve that. No one is perfect, she replied. But everyone gets a chance to change. My mother stayed quiet for a long time. Then she finally spoke. I spent months believing you destroyed my family. She looked at Elena. But I think the truth is. She paused. I stopped knowing my own family long before you arrived. It was the first honest thing I had heard her say in years. The lawsuit was dropped 2 weeks later. The news eventually moved on. The world found another scandal. Another headline. Another story. But inside our family, something changed. The Harrison Hope Foundation opened 6 months later. Elena became its director. Not because she wanted power. Because she wanted to finish the promise she made to my father. My brother returned to the company, but this time he changed. He spent less time chasing numbers. And more time building relationships. My mother began volunteering at the foundation. She said helping others reminded her of the woman she used to be. And me? I finally understood my father's greatest lesson. We spend so much of our lives chasing things that we think will prove our worth. Money. Success. Recognition. But in the end, the moments people remember are rarely about what we owned. They're about how we made them feel. Years later, I still keep one thing from my father's storage unit. The first letter he wrote to me. The one that said, "Keep an open heart." Because if I had walked away in anger, if I had believed the rumors, if I had judged Elena before knowing the truth, I would have lost the final gift my father ever gave me. Not the fortune. Not the inheritance. The truth. And maybe that's the greatest inheritance any of us can receive. The understanding that love is not always shown through what someone leaves behind. Sometimes it's revealed through what they spend their entire life trying to protect. If this story touched your heart, remember. The people we overlook today may be the ones carrying the answers we need tomorrow. And sometimes, the biggest secrets are not hidden because someone wants to deceive us. Sometimes they are hidden because someone is waiting for the right moment. For us to finally understand.